we're going to talk about graphing quadratics. We're going to talk about two different things. We're going to talk about standard form. So standard form is when you see it with that ax squared plus bx plus c. So ax squared plus bx plus c. So that's how we've been able to find our a, b, and c when we're doing the quadratic formula, or when we were just working on the last module of finding your vertex and zeros. Usually it was in standard form, so we were able to pull out that a, b, and c. Okay, so we're going to do that today. We're also going to talk about the vertex form. So vertex form is when you have those parentheses with the x plus h inside squared plus k, where your vertex was negative h and k. So we always remember, I kept saying change and keep. Okay, do you remember that? All right, so we are going to start with our standard form. So open it up and let's look at the standard form. And just one more time, I want you to write down that standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c. And so the first thing that we are going to do is we are going to calculate the axis of symmetry. And I don't know if you remember this, but we talked about the axis of symmetry a while back when we were doing absolute value functions. Okay, and the formula to do that is what we were doing yesterday and the day before, where we take x equals negative b over 2a. That's your axis of symmetry. So we're going to start by finding that using your b and a. And then we're going to plug it into a table, and we're going to find all the other y values in our table, because we're going to use our axis of symmetry to start our table, and then we're going to pick some more values, and then we're going to plug them into the function and find the rest of our values. All right, so let's start with example 1. So we're going to check that this is in standard form. So we have x squared, we have x, and then we have a constant. So that means it's in standard form, so we have our a, b, and c. So a is going to equal 1, b is going to equal negative 6, and c would equal 11. So we're going to use our formula of x equals negative b over 2a to find that axis of symmetry. So I'm going to say negative over 2a. Now it's negative b. My b value is negative 6. So I'm going to plug that in. And it's over 2a, which was 1, so I'm going to plug that in. And then we just simplify that. So negative 6 is a positive 6 over 2 times 1, which is 2. And then 6 divided by 2 is 3. So that's our axis of symmetry, where x is 3. So I'm going to go to my table, and that's going to be the first value that I plug into my table is going to be that 3. Now, after you have your axis of symmetry, you're just going to pick the next 3 points. I want to see 4 points in your table. So after 3 would be 4, 5, and 6. Okay, so now we've got to find our y values in our table. And that means we're going to substitute anywhere you see an x for the first x value to get our first y value. And then we're going to do it again and again and again with the next values. So you can use a calculator for this. I know there's not a lot of room on your notes. So we have that f of x, which is just another way of saying y, equals x squared minus 6x plus 11. And I'm going to plug in my first y value, which was that axis of symmetry, 3. So once you have it plugged in, you can either type it exactly like you see it into your calculator. I highly suggest using the parentheses more than the multiplication symbol. Or you can just go through your order of operations. 3 squared is going to be 9. A negative 6 times 3 is going to be a negative 18. And then we have plus 11. That's going to reduce to a negative 9 plus 11, which is going to be 2. So we're going to put 2 into our table next to the 3. And then we've got to do the same thing with 4, 5, and 6. So we're just going to keep plugging and chugging here. So we've got now 4 squared minus 6 times 4 plus 11. You're also going to have 5 squared. And I know you probably don't have a lot of room for this on your notes, so you can go ahead and use your calculator to help you figure this out. And then we've also got 6 squared minus 6 times 5 plus 11. So I'm going to give you a second to figure those out on your calculator, and then I'll fill them into my table. Alright, so when I plugged in 4, I got an answer of 3. When I plugged in when I plugged in 5, I got an answer of 6. And when I plugged in 6, I got an answer of 11. So I'm going to put those in my table. And then we're going to take those points and we're going to plot them on our graph. So I'm going to start with my vertex of 3, 2. So I'm going to go over 3 and up 2, make a dot. I'm going to go over 4 and up 3. I'm going to go over to 5 and go up to 6. And then our last one, it looks like, isn't going to fit on the graph, huh? And that's okay. I want you to have that 4th point just in case it fits on the graph, but you don't have to have it. Okay? So as you can see, we've got our first half of our parabola, but you have to remember that it also goes up the other side, right? So we found our vertex to be our axis of symmetry. If you remember what symmetry means, it means that it reflects perfectly and it matches. So we're going to reflect these 2 points over our axis of symmetry. So this is our axis of symmetry. And I just made a little dotted line. It's not actually part of your function, so you don't have to make the line. But I like to make a little dotted line just to remind me where I'm reflecting it. Okay? So then I'm going to go to the first point that's not my vertex, and I'm going to reflect it across that axis. So this point is 1 away from the axis, so I'm going to go 1 away on the other side. I'm going to go to my second point, and it is 2 away from my axis, so I'm going to go to 2 on the other side. After you have all of your points plotted, just make sure that it creates that nice U shape, and then you can go ahead and connect those dots to create your parabola, your quadratic function. Don't forget to put arrows on both ends. Alright, so we're going to move on to example 2 after you've got your nice little quadratic shape. And so we're going to do the same thing. Double check that it's in standard form, and then figure out what is your A, B, and C. Now this time, pay attention, because A, there's a negative in front of that x squared, so that actually makes A a negative 1. And then we get B is 2 and C is 2. I don't know if you've noticed, but we haven't really used C when you're finding the vertex or the axis of symmetry, because our formula is just x equals negative B over 2A. And so when we plug those in, we're going to do a negative B over 2A, and we said B was 2. And A, remember, this is the one that's a little different. A is negative 1. Sometimes we get into the habit, A is usually a positive 1, and so we forget that sometimes it can change. Alright, so this time, we have a negative times a positive. That makes a negative 2 over 2 times a negative 1, which is going to be negative 2. And then we reduce that. Negative 2 divided by negative 2 is going to make a positive 1. So now, remember, this is our axis of symmetry, so that becomes our first point in our table. So we're going to go over to our table, and I'm going to put that axis of symmetry in there. But then, I'm going to think about the next values. And it doesn't matter if you want to think of values smaller or larger than 1, but we just have to fill in 3 more points in our table. So for me, the next values are going to be 2, 3, and 4. I'm just thinking of the next numbers that come consecutively in our in counting. Okay, so now we have to go find all of our y values, which means we're going to plug them into this function. But you do have to be careful because there's that negative sitting there. So we're going to put parentheses, and that negative is outside of the parentheses. So our function is f of x equals negative parentheses squared plus 2 with parentheses plus 2. And these parentheses are where you're going to be plugging in our values. So our value in the table is a positive 1. Okay? And if you're going to use your calculator, make sure that you have the negative outside the parentheses, because your calculator is going to do 1 squared, which is 1, and then times that negative. which actually makes us a -1. That's the only time when you take something squared, it's going to become negative. So then we have plus 2 times 1, which is 2, plus 2. So -1 plus 2 is 1, plus 2 will be 3. So I get 3. My vertex is 1, 3. So take a few seconds and fill in your next couple of values. Remember that negative is outside of the parentheses. So you can just go back and change what's inside the parentheses. Okay, so after we have found all of our values, and I found, so we had our vertex, which was 3, and then I had a 2, and then a -1, and a -6. We put those in our table, and then we're going to graph the points. So I have 1, 3, I have 2, and 2, I have 3 and -1, and then I have 4 and -6. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then remember, after you plot those points, that's only 1/2 of our parabola. So we have to reflect them across that axis of symmetry. So I'm drawing a little dotted line just to remind me where my axis of symmetry is. You don't have to do that, but I just find it easier. And then we're going to reflect each of these points. So this point right here is 1 away from my axis of symmetry. So I'm going to go 1 the other side. This one is 2 away, so I'm going to go 2 to the other side. And this one is 3 away, so I'm going to go 3 to the other side. And it should create your nice U shape. If it doesn't, you did something wrong, like I did. I skipped something, I think. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Yep, I didn't count my axis here. Even on video, I make mistakes. So then we just connect, and whoops, it makes a nice U shape. If it doesn't, we probably did something wrong, but this one happens to, so we did it right. Alright, now the next couple examples are already in vertex form, so remember that is where they give you the parentheses with x plus h squared plus k, and the vertex is the point of -h, k. So remember, we always change the sign of the one in the parentheses, but we keep the sign outside. So you can actually already put that vertex in your table, and then we're going to keep going with the table and plot the points just like we did in the other examples. So looking at example 3, we want to look at our vertex here first. So remember, we always change the one in the parentheses, so that's going to be a -1. But then we keep the sign of the one outside, so that's going to be a +3. So that's the start of my table. As you can see, I already have my first y value. But then we do exactly like we did before, where we're just going to keep going with the same values. And so you can either keep going forward, so we could do -1, 0, 1, 2, or you could go backwards, and we could do -2, -3, and -4. I have a request to also go smaller, so we're going to try that one first. And so after that, we've got our values in the table, and then just like before, we're going to plug them back into the function. Okay? So this is going to be f of x, and again, you can use your calculator, that's fine. And then it's going to be x plus 1 squared plus 3. And you're just going to take your values and you're going to plug them in. So I'll start with the first one here. We're going to take a -2. So we're going to say -2 plus 1. And again, you can plug it straight into your calculator exactly like you see it. I'm just going to do it real quick in my head here. -2 plus 1 is going to be a -1 squared plus 3. -1 squared means -1 times -1, which is +1. And +1 plus 3 is 4. So when you plug that into your calculator, you should get a 4. If you don't, figure out why and fix it. Take a few seconds to fill in your last 2 points. Okay, so when you plug these in, we end up with a -2 squared. Oops. Let's see, this becomes a -2 squared, which is 4. And then 4. I'm sorry, -2 squared is 4. Then plus 3 is going to be 7. And then here we get a -3 squared, which is going to be 9. And 9 plus 3 is 12. So we have in our table then, I'm putting in a 7 and a 12. And then remember, after that you plot your points just like we did before. So I'm going to -1 over 1 and then up 1, 2, 3. And then I'm going to -2 and up 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I'm going to -3 and up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 right there at the top. And then of course my last one's not going to fit, and that's okay. But after we do that, remember you have to reflect across your axis of symmetry. Okay, so we have my first point that's not my axis is 1 away, so I'm going 1 the other direction. I go up here, it's 2 away, so I go 2 the other direction. It makes my nice U shape. So then we connect and draw your arrows. Okay, so now what I want you to do is to pause the video and I want you to go do example 4. A couple seconds. Okay, so your table should look like this. If you went with these numbers, if you went the other direction, then you probably have some different numbers, but your final product should look like this. So you have 2 points, here's your 2 zeros, as well as your y-intercept, and then your maximum or minimum is your vertex. So follow your next directions on Canvas.